180 and when rapid speed down to 2,500.
Point wherever you reduce speed to 180.
BlackBox.
Welcome back. This is hour 2 with my friend Travis Ransdell, or T.S. Ransdell, author of The Last Marine, Book 1, Book 2, Book 3, coming to your shelf soon.
Yeah.
To your virtual shelf. Yeah.
So that's paperbacks too.
Paperbacks?
You can get a paperback. Book 1 is also an audio.
Okay.
And I've recorded the audio for Book 2, but it's not been released yet. It's still in editing. Should be in the final stages of that by now.
So did you do your own voiceover when you?
I did.
Yeah, that's cool. You've got a face for radio there.
Yeah.
No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, no.
Yeah. Oh, what? I hit the wrong button. I should have hit move for myself. Okay. All right. Fine. Yeah, this thing is contagious. I have some Mike Tyson stuff on here.
I've heard that. Yeah.
But
the throwing hydrogen bombs or something.
Throwing hydrogen bombs. But our normal audio guy is actually on the West Coast. Zach, who wrote the Cupid song. We actually got blackballed. What is it called, Ian? When
it was
copyright claim.
But
So
just check that we're clear.
Oh, we are clear now. I'm still going to pick on YouTube for this, but Zach, who wrote the song Cupid and recorded that, is an employee of mine, and he probably did that on company time, which I own 99% of the royalties for that. Just kidding, Zach. Don't get your panties in a wad. But, yeah, in all reality, I mean, he's sitting behind the scenes over here at the computer at the audio side of the production. And YouTube is telling me I have a copyright infringement because of this label that he has signed with. They said I didn't have permission to use the song. And I'm like, well, I beg to differ. We actually have the artist sitting in the room with us. And so Ian fought that battle, and we're able to carry out letting folks listen to a song royalty-free unless he pisses me off, and then I'm going to own Zach.
Could charge him for it.
Yeah, own you, Zach. If you're listening and watching, just watch yourself before you wreck yourself.
You and the Chinese will own Zach.
Oh, right. The Chinese are coming. Just be prepared. Yeah, we were talking about that off camera today, that when you play this out and reading through Book 1 and Book 2, I started thinking through some of the environment that we're in today and how ownership in our nation works. That it goes all the way back through history, even to the Roman Empire, of how you're given, and Roman Empire down through Great Britain, how our original colonies, we adopted a lot of these sovereign concepts of how you run and manage a nation and a people group. But, in the U.S., we like to pride ourselves on ownership. And in my financial practice, I speak to clients all the time about this. I'm going to go, well, you're having a mortgage burning party. The day you pay off your mortgage, you feel elated, you feel accomplished. And it's something to be proud of. Yeah. But folks look at me cross-eyed when I say, hey, actually, I've got bad news. You still have a mortgage on your property, and it's a lifetime mortgage. And they go, what are you talking about? It's called property tax. You can't avoid property tax in our country. If you own anything, depending on which state you're in, there's a property tax. But over real estate, that's homage to the local municipality. Yeah. That's tied to the state municipality, that's tied to the federal government.
But if you don't pay it, they'll come take it away from you.
Yeah, it's yours as long as you pay homage.
As long as you pay.
So if you think about what's going on in our country, where the stimulus and where we're at now because of the COVID crisis, the COVID pandemic, real or made up, no matter which side of the fence you're on that, the reality is that it has a cause and effect. From a financial point of view, by the end of this year, we'll probably be at about $6 trillion of stimulus that has been funneled through each citizen and business, whether you like it or not. The federal government has dumped money back into the hands of the people, and you think, oh, that's awesome. But at what cost? Generationally, who's paying for this? And when you think about how the economic system works and the amount of money that other countries pour into our country through debt securities, a.k.a. treasury bills, bonds, and they buy our debt, well, that comes at a cost. And it's just interesting to me that the way you've written your book, you kind of allude to that and allude to the inner workings with the Chinese.
Right.
So, I'll stop pontificating about economics here and make it about your book. But pick up with that story. Now we'll jump over into book 2. And I don't want to give away book 1. I would tell folks go read it.
Yeah, I don't want to get into spoilers or anything.
Right.
But where book 1 would deal with a young man in the Sino-American War. He volunteers for the Marine Corps, and for him, his motivation to do this, to risk his life, to kill, to deal with the death of his friends, is for what he loves. And that's his motivation, is he's doing this to defend, to protect what he loves at a time when the country is at peril, its survival is at stake. And I set up this scenario where the United States has gotten into a very long war, and then through the change of political winds, there's a new president who is very sympathetic, even pro-Marxist and pro-Chinese in his agenda and in his vision for the country. So suddenly then the war goes through a period of de-escalation, and he's going to start bringing troops home. And so the main character, Sean Harris, is now part of one of the first units to return back to the United States to find that while one segment, one subculture, if you will, of Americans, patriotic Americans, have answered the call and been sent overseas to fight in a war, you've had another section of the population or subculture that has not. Well, so I take this. What's the motivation then for this character Harris to go fight? What's the motivation of the people who say, "Nah, I'm not going to," at a time when their country's survival is at stake? What motivates them to not answer that call? And so what he comes back to are a bunch of people who have stayed in college instead, or didn't go, and who now view the war as they view the war as unjust. America was not the good guys in this fight. And the Marines, the soldiers who are returning home, are villains. They're not heroes. They're villains. And they view him as an enemy. So he goes essentially from one battlefield, a hot war in China, to return home to an American culture war that's heating up and becoming hot.
Wow.
And so how does he deal with this? Because this is something that he's not even... These are these characters. He's not trained for this. He's not programmed for this. And while he senses it, he has other people tell him, like, it's not a big deal. You're kind of he doesn't adjust to this as well. And so it's conflict is obviously going to arise with these two different. Just like when he's fighting the Chinese, just as way as communism is the antithesis of a free republic, a democratic republic, and that's a clash of cultures. Again, you've got a clash of cultures here, a clash of ideologies that are not compatible. And that's where I've really seen, going way back, you look at what has been taught in schools and the approach in education. You look at the counterculture movement of the 1960s. Frankly, it's not compatible with Americanism. Right. And ultimately, you cannot have two different subcultures surviving and thriving together. This is what led to the American Civil War. In fact, I use that as a tagline in one of my advertisements. Was it one country, two cultures, a house divided? Right. Because it can't stand.
It really does feel a lot like where we are today.
Yeah.
I have friends today who, I would be considered a conservative in terms of my viewpoints, and But I have a social heart. I care about people. I care about us, our society of those who are struggling to make it.
In fact, I would say if you truly care, you have to be a conservative.
Yeah.
Because it's only through freedom that people have the ability for social mobility.
Yeah.
You don't find a whole lot of Marxists rising through the trenches and earning wealth and raising their status or taking care of anybody else. If a Marxist rises in power, it's only because he's literally crushing people underneath him to do it.
What do you think the attraction is to Marxism? Why are certain people, and what's the DNA of a person who's attracted to Marxism?
In my opinion, and from people I've met as well as having studied Marxist leaders, they love control. In fact, something I used to I've used it as a tagline. I also used to teach this when I taught world history, that if you really want to get to what's a common theme in the history of the world, the major theme would be the conflict of those who want to be free fighting against those who want to control them.
Yeah.
And you get that, through the ages.
So how would a Marxist debate you? I think I know the answer to this, but in your opinion, a Marxist would say, no, we don't want control. We want to give control away where there's a share amongst
Well, I'd say that's
everyone.
I'd say that's a lie.
Yeah.
History would back that up, because in order for them to look, they're not talking about doing anything that they give away. They're talking about the control to take away from others and giving to people that they want to give it to.
Yeah.
And historically, we've seen that in the process of doing that, they keep a huge chunk of it for themselves.
Yeah.
History backs that up. It was that Jesus said, a tree by its fruit.
Yeah.
Well, look at the fruit that Marxism has given us for the 100+ years, or any kind of oligarchical system of government, compared to self-government.
Yeah.
In the sense of, you go back to ancient Greek democracy, Roman Republic, the democratic republic we have in this country, and the less government control, the more freedom people have, the more wealth is created, and you get more social economic mobility. Look at the Pilgrims there in Plymouth.
Yeah.
They started out as a socialistic commune. It wasn't called socialism at the time, but that's what they were practicing, and they're starving to death.
Yeah.
And then they divide up the land and say, okay, everybody take care of your own family, and if you have anything left over, you can sell it. And a year later, they're selling food to the Indians and celebrating Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
And just the freedom to do that provides for people.
So you look at what's happening, and again, I really want to spend some time being able to draw a correlation between The Last Marine, Book 1 and Book 2. Haven't seen Book 3 yet. You haven't let me in to see those.
I'm still in the first draft. That's almost done. So.
Wow, that's exciting.
It is, yeah.
But there really is, even though this is a fictional book, it feels like one of those movies based on a true story. And the producer and the director are able to kind of fabricate, some sensationalism into the story.
Yeah.
That's one of the things I'm picking up on in reading these two books, is that I really feel like you just changed the name of some characters. And that's when I have to be honest with you, when I read Book 1, I was like, well, dude, this is pretty simple for you. All you did is you changed the president from Obama to
or Leakey.
Leakey, yeah. And then Trump is the hard-ass new guy.
Yeah. Although I actually wrote that before Trump was
that's
elected, or even
24 years ago. You had this idea that you put on paper, and finally published it in 2000.
It came out
16?
November of 2016.
2016. Yeah.
So now Trump had been elected by then. Anyway, he hadn't taken office, but he had been elected.
And
by
Book
then.
2 you published in 18?
19. October of last year.
October 19. Okay.
So.
But these ideas, the story, the series of The Last Marine has been around for years, as we talked about in our first show, first podcast together. So have you had any other person draw that correlation or ask you that question? Is this drawn from current event?
Yeah. Well, yeah. Some people have read it like, wow, this is that you really, it was like what kind of some, especially in book 2 here, were some of the events that took place in that. People said this is what's happening.
Yeah.
Now.
Because you talk about a certain riot and event that took place that is similar to what we've seen happen in Portland.
Yeah. Well, to write that, because I have a group there in book 2. I've got a group that's heavily based, an Antifa-like group, a Black Lives Matter group, and then La Raza was another group I looked at. I wanted to find groups that were Marxist, very anti-American, and that really looked to play on that kind of intersectional politics to divide people up into kind of this ethno-tribe kind of thinking. And so I created these groups. I watched a lot of Antifa videos on YouTube, websites, read through the Black Lives Matter website, was learning about them at that time, just see kind of what they were about. And well, like with Black Lives Matter, you could read through the material and you could easily see that they're really a Marxist group disguised as some kind of they call themselves civil rights, but they're basically against anything that's not just anti-American, but kind of anti-civilization.
Yeah.
They're.
Well, we pulled up the site today, and when someone says something, or when I'm looking at going, okay, this is a belief that I have. Is this reality, or is this just me? I want to challenge my own woke, right?
Yeah.
And fact check myself. But we pulled up the site today pre-show with Black Lives Matter, and the first hashtag at the top of the page is hashtag defund the police.
Yeah.
And that's really sad, because I think that's a narrative that's not necessarily true. We obviously know that a police officer did something really atrocious, committed a crime. We saw it on video, and he'll get his. I have utmost belief in the justice system, that he will serve time. He will pay for his crime of taking a man's life unjustly.
Well, we've seen this tactic used before.
Yeah.
What's his name? Michael Brown.
Right.
In the Ferguson riots. Again, we get this really violent reaction, knee-jerk reaction. Again, based on emotionalism, because it's not based on too many facts. And like this last case, I know they're investigating that, and the video does not look good in favor of the cop.
Yeah.
And definitely. But like with Michael Brown, he was punching the cop and trying to steal his gun.
Yeah.
And, we have this whole myth of hands up, don't shoot thing and getting shot in the back. I think the facts of that case aside, I think it was really nothing more than an excuse to go out and riot. They want something like that because they need an issue to gin up that emotional reaction to get people to go out and destroy things.
Yeah. And again, it goes back to the first show. We were talking about things that are based on emotion versus intellectual debate to be able to understand a person's point of view.
Right.
Even to debate a point of view beyond emotion.
Yeah, they're not looking to make anyone safer. They're looking to destroy things.
Yeah.
Because that's what they're going out and doing.
Noah, did you pull up the site? Yeah. By chance? Were you able to find the page I was looking for earlier in terms of the supporters of capital B, capital L, capital M? And I actually had a lady on my show 2 shows ago, I think will be produced here soon and released, who was a black captain in the fire department, one of the first black captains in the Norfolk Fire Department, who came up through a system that, all the way back to suffrage, when you think about women not being able to give an ability to vote in our country, and how we have made strides in our country to really try to right wrongs. And that's the beautiful thing about a democratic republic. Only in a democratic republic could times where past mistakes could be righted through a people group to say, hey, our thinking has evolved, our understanding has evolved, and it only happened through true debate.
Well, and even
not shame or sensationalism.
It wasn't going out and tearing up a street or a business district.
Yeah.
Well, you think about when you tear up a business district, and in these areas where they riot, all they're doing is depriving people of the economic means to independence.
Yeah.
And which is only going to make them even more reliant on government. Yeah. So these riots are not liberating anyone. In fact, they're enslaving people. They're demolishing people. They're demolishing independence in those regions.
Yeah.
I think really nothing more. The whole much of a lot of topics, be it civil rights, be it environmentalism, feminism, whatever, is nothing more than kind of a veneer for this, for anger and a desire to destroy.
Yeah.
Like I said, if you ask a lot of these people, what are you for? What is it you believe in? What are you trying to accomplish? Outside of just some kind of very generic slogans, they're really not for anything. They're against America.
Yeah. And I tell my friend, I go, look, I'm for Black lives. Lowercase b, lowercase l, lowercase m. Mm-hmm. Black Lives Matter. Not capital B, capital L, capital M.org.
Right. Which is
that organization I have some real problems with in terms of their narrative and their agenda.
Well, I think saying, if you don't support the group Black Lives Matter, that means you're against blacks. That'd be like, the medieval popes saying, if you don't believe the Pope, you're against God. Right. And they really try to draw that kind of moral equivalency.
Yeah.
Hey, if you don't support them, then you don't meet their moral threshold.
Yeah.
Then you're a villain and needs to be burned at the stake.
Yeah. And it's interesting. You don't necessarily go in your books into Black Lives Matter or necessarily call it Antifa. And I would say even 24 years ago, I'll be transparent. 24 years ago, Antifa, there was no such thing that I'm aware of. And I was 26 years old back then, and kind of in the know. And
yeah,
and
I wouldn't have called it back then either. What I really noticed, like back in the 90s, what I noticed as a Marine was a difference in culture and mindset of people who served and people who did not.
Yeah.
One of this came from a conversation I had. I was out with a Marine buddy, and he had started dating some gal, and they wanted to set me up on a blind date, which how those go. But I let myself get talked into it, and so we go on this date, and what was it? The girl, and these were girls. They were college graduates. I remember, I think being told they made like $40,000, which sounded like a lot of money back. It was a good chunk of money back. 92, 93, and this was around the time when I think there was talk of sending troops into Yugoslavia was falling apart. And there were people saying that we needed to send American troops in there to avoid like another world war, like World War I. A lot of those comparisons were being made. And she was in favor of sending U.S. troops in there, and I was not. And I told her I really didn't see a vital American interest in there. And so I'm asking her, why do you want to send troops in there? And she talked about, the violence that's taking place. People are dying. People are starving. She just thought it was the right thing to do. It's a nice thing to do. And so I applaud her for her compassion and say, if you truly feel that way, then why don't you join the Red Cross or some other organization? Why don't you go over there, volunteer to go over there and help these people that need help? Because I said that is a nice thing to do. Yeah. Instead of opposed to just sending the military, this blanket, send the military over there. And she looked at me very seriously, almost like kind of like I was mentally retarded, and said, "Well, that's not."
Oh, you can't use that word anymore.
I said, I guess you can. Yeah. Anyway, she looked at me like I was an idiot and said, "Well, that's not my job. That's your job." And it really dawned on me, this is someone, I was a U.S. Marine, and this is someone who sees me as like the hired help.
Yeah.
She gets to go vote or support a cause, but let me go back to my $40 grand a year job,
right?
And let's go send these guys that are making $1,000 a month or less back then, go over there to deal with that whole mess. And it just dawned on me this huge disconnect, not just economically, but intellectually, culturally, and this concept that somehow, I'm a free man, serving to serve my country by choice, for certain values and principles that I believe in, that I think are worth fighting for, worth killing for if necessary. So that can be passed on to my children. And here's a woman who thinks I'm just here to kind of do whatever she wants to vote for that makes her feel good. Not that she wants to do it. Not that it was important enough to her to go do it, but it was important enough to go send me to do it, but not herself. And so then that was kind of, that like I said, that kind of cultural difference, that kind of sense of elitism, it started playing in my mind about where we're at as a nation, where you have some people that are willing to do things, to go in the military, to serve, and those who sit back and don't. What motivates people to do one thing as opposed to the other?
So knowing what you know today, and you have 3 young boys, and I've got 2 sons serving right now. And unfortunately, I think, and again, I don't have scientific proof for the number I'm about to give you, but I think 50% of our country could actually give a rat's ass about their serving. Now, they're getting paid, but they are also serving a mission. They're serving a belief system. They're serving a cultural belief system that's been instituted for over 200 years now. That, honor, courage, commitment, those attributes that we see in young men and women that end up serving, whether they do it out of, I want to pay for my college education, to some duty of country, to I want to honor my mother, my father, or someone who served before me. The call to stand up and serve, it's one of the greatest, and I toast those people who do that and make that commitment every day, who join that fraternity that we were part of, and even the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the Coast Guard, the Marines being the best, even though they've got some issues. I salute those guys, but here's why I'm going with that question. About 10 years from now, maybe less, your oldest son will have an opportunity to serve. How do you think, knowing what you know today and knowing about the culture that maybe half of our society looks at those people who serve as evil? And that's what I see. I'm seeing it happening in Portland. I'm seeing it happen in certain parts of the country where if you put on a uniform, they want to defund you. They want you to go away.
But they're demonizing police.
And
actually rationalizing, trying to legitimize violence against these people,
right?
Who literally will put themselves in harm's way to protect them. And they're out there shooting lasers in their eyes, throwing rocks at their head, trying to set them on fire, throwing Molotov cocktails at them.
There was a couple of attorneys that did that in New York City. Isn't that crazy?
I know. So,
well, what do you say to folks? So, number one, I want you to answer this for me, if you would, putting you on the spot. Would you tell your sons to serve?
I wouldn't discourage them from it. Now, and I understand some of the conflict there, because especially as a father, you want to. You want to protect. I mean, our sense of protection is different than a mother's, but we still want to protect. In fact, that's something I addressed in my 3rd book, because really, I realized that as a father, my desire to protect my children is really vanity. Because I can't. Any protection I give them is temporary at best.
Right.
My duty as a father is, since I have 3 sons, my duty, my main God-given obligation is to teach them how to be strong men.
That's good.
And they're going to, because sooner or later, like one of the lines in my book
there's a culture out there right now that says, Travis, you can't identify them as men.
Yeah, well,
You have to wait for them to identify. They may identify as a unicorn.
Yeah, well, those people are nuts. All right, they just are. I'm not listening to them. I'm ignoring
We're
them.
losing some fans as we speak on this show by setting some lines in the sand here.
Our
belief system.
There are some objective facts.
Yeah.
I mean, there are laws of nature that you just cannot deny, and try to claim that there's 15 genders or whatever. It's crazy. And in fact, I think you actually do it.
It's maddening to try to keep up with.
It is. Well, you think about it, it's kind of tragic. I think you're setting a lot of people up for failure if they think their gender is something that's fluid, that they can just kind of, I want to be this today or that tomorrow.
Yeah.
Particularly when you get them start making decisions that are irreversible. Yeah. And we know it by our age, decisions you're making at 20 will put you on a trajectory that you may not be able to back out of if you want. Or if you do back out of it, it's a lot more work and there are everlasting consequences.
Jack Welch's wife, the old CEO of GE, I think it was his wife. I've got her book in my office. It makes me think of her book called 10-10-10. A 10-second decision leads to a 10-minute consequence, which leads to a 10-year consequence, which leads to a lifetime of undoing or trying to undo maybe things that you're like, man, I wish I wouldn't have done that.
Yeah.
To, if you can stop at that 10-second decision and go, okay, I have an intersection here. I can go left, I can go right with this decision. If I go left, I give up all of those things, the opportunity cost of what I give up by not going right. Yeah. And those challenges come to our boys, to our children, to our daughters every day. And that's, I take that same position.
We got to prepare them.
Yeah.
So, as far as serving in the military, I figure if they want to do that, well, no matter whether they serve in the military or not, I've told them they will learn how to swim, fight, and shoot. Those are three things they're going to have to learn. Now, if they don't want to pursue that as they get older, then that's their. Sooner or later, they outgrow me.
You're teaching your boys. You're putting them through jiu-jitsu.
Yes.
As well.
Yeah.
Do you practice the art yourself?
No. I, as a young man, I did wrestle and I did judo.
Yeah.
But these days,
why'd you pick jiu-jitsu? I'm just curious.
I like I thought it would be better for them in that it does a lot of grappling, and that was something that I had learned.
Line training, we called it in the Marine Corps. Yeah. Do you remember that?
Yeah. Well, basically what seems to
grab,
work.
Twist, grab.
Yeah, the grab, twist, pull.
Yeah.
And what was it, bull in the ring? Playing those games. I've noticed from also watching martial artists, it seems that grapplers have an easier time to incorporate punching and strikes as opposed to strikers learning to grapple.
Right.
And I also want them in an environment where they could go in there and get roughed up, but in a safe way.
Yeah.
Because it's going to toughen them up, to learn how to. I've learned this with they say like in military training, a lot of guys anymore have never been in a fist fight. They've never taken a punch. Yeah.
Mike Tyson, I wish I had the button here. We did initially, and it's gone now. We can't find it on the internet. I think somebody owns the quote, and everybody has a plan until you get punched in the face.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And, well, I got into a lot of fist fights in grade school, even through high school, and you'd get maybe suspended, and I had one principal try to tell me that actually it takes a bigger man to take the first punch. And I remember even as a kid, I thought, well, that's easy for you to say. You're not taking the first punch.
Right.
I'm not taking the first punch from somebody if I can avoid it.
Did you ask him if you could test that theory with him?
No, I kept my mouth shut, got out of the office. But I had.
Man, I need the Mike Tyson buttons today. Where are they, guys? Come on, Noah.
I talked earlier about my father.
Call Zach.
And two grandfathers, and they all taught me that if you even think somebody even acts like they want to get aggressive with you, that's when you throw the first punch.
Yeah.
And you don't get that in school today. They call cops and that sort of thing. So, I want to get my boys into jiu-jitsu. And now with a lot of the lockdown stuff, they've not been able to do that. So my plan is I'm getting a punching bag for them. So they go start punching, and I'll spar with them. Yeah,
nice.
lightly, but get them. I've got them some boxing gloves so they can beat each other up in the garage and learn to fight that way. But I want to give them the right mindset too. So if they go in the military, first of all, they've got that mindset to succeed, and then also to withstand any kind of indoctrination they can get in the military. Because we know now that that's happening. You give the left any kind of control over something, like we've seen in the schools, they start to indoctrinate. And
yeah, unfortunately, I've seen that really in our own life, in our own family with my two boys who are serving. And, I don't want to, put their careers at jeopardy to say which one and where, but one more than the other in a branch of service that he's in, where they actually stop training, like life-saving training, to focus on an indoctrination of teaching a diversity.
I've heard
teaching,
this.
Of everybody gets a trophy kind of mentality.
That blows my mind. I know when we were in, they just wanted to teach us to kill. I remember kill people. Yeah, kill people, break things.
Right.
The first lesson we had in the school of infantry was when in doubt, shoot.
Yeah.
And I've heard like the top.
You're going to drive a lot of people crazy with this podcast saying that, because they're going to think, oh, well, that's the problem with society today, is that you're shooting first and asking questions later.
Well, I guess it depends on who you're shooting.
That's right. But when you bring that back to the reality of where we're at today, is that there's this counterculture mentality that if you don't believe the way I do, we're going to protest you, we're going to shame you, we're going to do everything we can in our power to stop you from having your belief system. That if you believe counter to my belief, you're wrong.
Right.
Not just different. You're just wrong.
And this actually isn't new. They did this in the Chinese Cultural Revolution. You can see the Bolsheviks doing that when they started taking over Russia. They start trying to destroy religion, destroy churches. Alexander Solzhenitsyn writes about how he had a cross taken away from him that belonged to his father, who was killed in World War I, because they're trying to wipe. If you were pro-Christian, then you were anti-revolution. They set these standards that you have to have complete obedience, complete compliance, not just with your behavior, but with your thoughts. Well, and that's what 1984
let me give some
into.
context to you saying these things, because some people who are coming in the middle of this, or maybe listening to podcast number 2, the interview with first hour with you, you have a master's in history.
Correct.
So you have some contextual authority to be able to look back through history and say, history in some ways, the old cliche of it repeats itself. You can go back through history and see some things that have happened to say, I see some of these habits, some of these, not habits, but some of these behaviors.
Right.
Coming to fruition again, these character traits.
Yeah, characteristic, because his human character, while facts change, human character doesn't.
Yeah.
The things that motivated us today motivated mankind 1,000 years ago. That's why you can relate to a lot of the history. If you stay the Republic of Rome. How did Rome go from a republic? They overthrew a king, Etruscan kings, became a republic. Actually came up with the idea of writing their laws down and posting them in a public place, to a point where their laws become perverted and then disregarded because supposedly the system didn't work, even though they weren't obeying the laws, and then falling into dictatorship. You can see kind of a similar process attempt kind of happening in our country. Like I said, the things that motivate people, the ideas, the process of manipulation, the feelings. People today feel love and anger and fear the same way people 3,000 years ago did. So often what will motivate people or cause people to act a certain way is the same. So you do see similar tactics, similar approaches that are used. People are concerned about family. People are concerned about safety. Was it Ben Franklin who talked about people who give up freedom for the sake of security? Find they have neither. I'm paraphrasing. But that's very real, and that's applicable in many different eras of history.
You know what's crazy to me, Travis, is that if we go back over the years and we look at where we are today, you would think that as a nation with information that's at our fingertips, I can jump onto that machine over there and find any information on any subject that I want in microseconds. That with information should be this power to make intellectual decisions and have understanding. But what's interesting is that I'm reminded of a fictional movie that came out in 2006, and you guys fact check me here if you can. Noah, look up. There was a movie that came out around 2006, and it reminds me of the environment that we're in right now, where people got to a point where their IQ went down.
Oh, Idiocracy or something?
Idiocracy.
Yeah.
That's
I've not seen it, but I've heard a lot of people talk about it.
I've watched the movie a couple of times, and embarrassingly funny. That I'm serious. You watch this movie and you're like, oh my God, that's our society today. We have become educated derelicts. We tend to not face the truth of what's in front of us, of what's reality, of what we can verify as truth, to we take that back and go, well, that's not my truth. And what we've added these words, my wife has texted me saying, how's the podcast going? Ian, can you shoot her a text and tell her it's going great? We're on hour 2. But we've come to this world of convenient truth that, well, Travis, you have your truth and I'll have my truth. And we've replaced the word with Travis. It's okay for you to have your opinion and I have my opinion. We've replaced opinion with an important word called truth.
Yeah. That's a good
And
point.
when I look at the definition of truth compared to the definition of opinion, they are stark differences between those two. And unfortunately, we're in an environment now. So you guys put up Idiocracy. I think that's a movie. Folks, if you don't understand what we're talking about, go watch this movie and you'll see the Idiocracy in what's going on in Seattle, what's going on in New York, what's going on in Austin, and in these cities where people have perverted truth with opinion. And it's something that I think has happened in capital B, capital L, capital M.
Yeah.
Where a truth that Black Lives Matter, lowercase b, lowercase l, lowercase m, they do matter. I have amazing friends who are Black. I have amazing friends who are white, who are Indian, and I think that there are people who have been oppressed, and we need to correct oppression for all people. But
and freedom does that.
Yeah. And that's it's so interesting that in your fictional book it feels like a lot of truth in what we're seeing in culture today play out. So we need to get off our soapbox and actually talk about the book and talk about your writing. So book 3 that's coming out. When will that be released?
I don't know. It's a simple answer.
Okay.
I want to get that. I'm working to get, because I publish independently, so I still got I'll do a lot of my own editing, and then I have another editor that I use. And then, fortunately, I have an aunt who's also been a great editor, proofreader, beta reader for me. And
what's her name?
It's my Aunt Christine.
Aunt Christine, how are you doing? We wanted to give you a shout out. She corrects the English.
She does.
The use of the Queen's English for a history major.
I'm a terrible speller, and she's much better at grammar than I am, and she's great for catching a lot of mistakes or inconsistencies. And she's been, I think next to my wife, she's been a big part of the support that I've had.
Awesome.
And
I just want to give her a shout out. There you go, Aunt Christine.
She's a former school. Did I say that earlier? Yeah, she's a former school teacher. Yeah.
I thought you were going to tell me she was a former Marine. I was going to be like, what? We're getting her on the show.
No, but anyway, so I'm working. I want to get that. I want to get it out this year, before 2020 ends. But unless there's some unforeseeable event that really slows me down, it should be out either late this year or early next year. So.
Okay. People want to read your books, books plural. Where can they get it?
You can get them on Amazon.com. And
are you only publishing on Amazon?
Right now I'm self-publishing through Amazon.
Okay.
Now you can go to my website, which is tsransdell.com. There's links to Amazon.
So Ransdell, TSRANSDELL.com. We'll put it on the website for you too.
Yeah, thanks.
Do some backlinks. Maybe we can make some money from the commissions.
Maybe so.
The massive commissions we make by selling books on our website.
Yeah.
The affiliate program. So in book 3, where's that going to pick up with this Marine?
Okay, that picks up then with what do you do then once you as free people, as free men. And I do write this with a male perspective because I'm a free American male, so I have that I have that sense of life. So that's what I write with.
Not that of a unicorn.
No, no. What do free men do when they realize that the system that is supposed to uphold law, supposed to protect certain rights, and that really, that's what John Locke wrote about it as the social contract. We give up a certain amount of freedom and wealth for a government. What do we get back out of it? Yeah. And there's that concept that men are designed to serve government. John Locke's was that government is actually to serve men, that they are given a God-ordained authority, but it's to protect life, it's to protect property.
So those who don't know the name, John Locke, give us some context. English
philosopher who came up with the phrase that basically the purpose of government is to protect life, liberty, and property. Yeah. Now, this was an inspiration for our founding fathers who heavily relied upon Locke when they wrote our Declaration of Independence. However, the term property was changed to pursuit of happiness because Ben Franklin and Thomas Jefferson feared that using the word property itself might actually be used as an excuse to say that slavery basically a legitimate practice of free men. Now I know about a lot of
property could be defined even back then as human
slaves. What
was
John Locke was talking about was when you can own property, particularly in an agricultural society, is the only means by which you can create your own wealth. We need land, we need property to create wealth. And being able to create wealth, you have independence. Yeah. Otherwise, back then in England, if you didn't have property and you're then having to pay someone to use their property to create wealth, so much of what you create was then paid in usury, or rent and that sort of thing. So again, property is the ability to achieve independence. Yeah. And now I know a lot of the counterculture says that the United States was founded on slavery, like that was it the 1619 Project or whatever that's called. But that actually was a hot topic then. Most of the founding fathers were against slavery. It wasn't something created in the United States, but actually brought over. Slavery is an element of the old world that had made its way over into the new world, as the terminology was at that time. And they're trying to figure out how do we phase this out? How do we move away from that standard? So we get life, liberty, pursuit of happiness out of that. So that's where John Locke, where he comes in. But that social contract, his notion was that government is to protect life, liberty, and property, and when it does not, then mankind has actually a righteous duty to overthrow that government. Because then that government is demanding you serve the government as opposed to serving God. If God gives us the right or the freedom to decide whether we accept or deny Him, who's government to say we have to accept them no matter what?
Interesting.
So that was his perspective.
So when you look at that today, you fast forward from 16th century, you're saying?
I think, law comes from 17th century.
17th century. To today, what would you see happening in this culture today that's counter to that theory, that concept, that pursuit of life, liberty, happiness.
Well, first of all, no one's taught to respect property anymore.
We've seen that over the last few weeks.
We
right?
have, yeah. Well, not just the destruction of it. What about intellectual property?
Yeah.
Somebody has an idea, and that's enough to destroy their life.
Yeah.
That's basically saying you don't have a right to be wrong. You don't have a right to dissent. Yeah. You can't even think something or challenge. See people that, with the whole, we're talking about COVID. If you come up with whoever these people are who on social media have determined that certain things can't be mentioned, or your statements are pulled, or your videos are pulled. I mean, who are these people that are in fact, people have started looking into the credentials of these so-called fact checkers.
Right.
I don't
say that 3 times.
Yeah, really. I don't think none of them are doctors.
Yeah.
Yet somehow they feel qualified because they're ideologists is what they're doing. And they're not concerned about medicine. In my opinion, they're not concerned about medicine or health so much as in an ideology. They're trying to control a narrative for political purposes.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up in terms of creators and innovators. If we look at the CCP, the Communist Party of China, that I'm alluding to, they own over 50% of their partnerships in business in the Chinese government. But what's interesting that we have found over the years, they don't make anything as innovators too often that I can think of.
Yeah.
They are master copiers and knockoffs. And my mother-in-law taught total quality management in the Navy. And that was an approach of total quality management, total quality leadership. The father of that is recognized as Dr. Deming and John Deming. I think it was John Deming. He took that mindset to Ford and said, look, this is how we manage this assembly process. And Ford took some of those ideas but kind of shunned Dr. Deming. And guess where he took it? To China. And said, look, you need TQM, you need this total quality management process. And really took that idea of the assembly process, and it ended up adopted there, not in a way for innovation, but copyright infringement.
Yeah.
And what's unfortunate today is that I see that in this culture that we're in now is that no one wants to work, in my opinion, for the new thing, for the new opportunity. It's a copy or copyright infringement of taking someone else's intellectual property and going, that's not really yours. That's ours, and that needs to be spread amongst everyone.
Well, it all goes back to how does a culture teach its people to view the individual? Does the individual count or not?
No, everybody gets a trophy, the equal trophy.
Well, no, but I mean, as far as because if an individual and a culture doesn't value an individual, thus you can't value individual thought nor individual creation or individual property is intellectual now as much as it is physical. You come up with an idea. I remember back in the 90s being over in Asia, you go overseas, there's bootleg copies of everything.
Right.
Music, videos, guys would buy. I remember seeing the cassette tapes. Not all their cassette tapes, but they'd have AC/DC's 30 or 20-year career back then, all on one cassette. And, I'm sure they're not getting any royalties for that. Communism doesn't respect the individual. Yeah. Therefore, it doesn't respect individual property nor individual rights or ideas, because everything is about serving supposedly the greater good or the greater collective. And in their practice, that greater good is communist tyrants, politicians.
What's interesting to that statement, I in between 2 financial careers, I had a packaging company I owned with a partner. And we were doing business for a large chainsaw manufacturer who was a German chainsaw manufacturer. I don't want to give them too much hype and too much promo. But we weren't allowed as a contract packager, light manufacturer, to have any of our outsourced business go to one say, plastic injection mold manufacturer.
Mm-hmm.
It had to be with 2 or 3 different experts in a field, let's say of plastic injection mold, or mold injection, where you'd make these parts for this large German chainsaw manufacturer. People can figure that out if they think chainsaw is German, who is that, especially in this town. But the interesting thing is that they didn't want a copycat. Like if we could go to China as an example and get really cheap labor and really cheap manufacturing. But if you took this intellectual property that a German engineer had developed and it was all in one place with one manufacturer, guess what was going to happen? It was going to get copied and resold to a billion people.
Yeah.
And so there was no respect, and there was no way to really stop that. In the U.S., there's a lot of channels and there's a lot of legal process that you can make a copycat cease and desist from their impropriety of copying you. But not so easy in China, not so easy in countries that don't respect ingenuity, innovation, and original idea.
And hard work at that.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, like we've seen with a lot of the riots, how many businesses have been destroyed.
Yeah.
They don't.
I'll give the people of China, I'll give the people of Asia Minor, very, very, very hard workers. But there is a caste system, for lack of a better term.
Well, look, take Hong Kong for an example.
Yeah.
Where Hong Kong, or Singapore too, where Western culture, I used to teach us that Western culture is international now. It's not just in Europe. It's not just in the United States.
Yeah.
Probably the freest example of capitalism at one time practiced in this world was Hong Kong. I mean, where we started moving as Americans, where our government, our culture started moving away from laissez-faire capitalism, Hong Kong was embracing it. And look at the wealth that little tiny island created compared
amazing,
to
right?
compared to all of China.
Yeah.
Singapore also has created a lot of wealth. And that's the thing about culture. Culture is not tied in with race. It's tied into ideas. It's tied into the practice of ideas. It's tied into what a person values and how they express that.
Yeah.
And we can see in certain things, and Western culture has proven to, over history, to create wealth, prosperity, and freedom. And that only really matters if you got to have a culture that values the individual effort, individual wealth, for that to flourish. Yeah. Because if it doesn't, and these things are taken away from you, as we've seen in cultures that don't value this, they either, one, do not advance out of a Stone Age, or if they have in places like China or communist Russia or in Cuba or what recently here in Venezuela, when they move away from those values, you then see this decline, this collapse, and they regress back to a more primitive state.
If you don't believe that's a problem for a country, all you have to do is look at Mexico, just 1,200 miles to our south here, and see that corruption and lack of respect for human beings is not a problem. I mean, that country has been so infiltrated with corruption by the cartels that it's almost impossible to figure out a way in how they can come out of that.
It really is. It's kind of scary,
And it's unfortunate that I say that because of my belief in God and belief in human man, that good will prevail. But I'm like, is that here in this time, or is this in the afterlife that we see that happen?
I guess ultimately, it'll be in the afterlife.
Yeah.
But, because this world's never supposed to be perfect.
Right.
Mankind was told that right from the start.
So, we sound like two old men complaining about the world around us. If you were president for a day, and you could see some change and you had 100% support of your Congress. What would you do different? What would you say to 340 million people to say, here's what I'm going to do to kind of do my best to unite us?
Well, one day is not enough to unite us.
Yeah.
I mean, the American counterculture, well, we think of it really as not really hitting full force until the 1960s. It's been around longer than that. People point to with the Wilson administration, the concepts that our Declaration and Constitution were irrelevant, outdated, that sort of thing. If I could do anything, if I had that kind of that kind of power, would probably be to disempower the government, to get it out of people's lives, to get it out of people's decision making. Yeah. So that when people make a decision, like if I have a doctor who wants to treat me, go like a COVID thing here. Yeah. If I have a doctor who wants to treat me with an illness, I don't want political considerations taken into this. Or my own profession as a teacher. If I have my children in a school, I don't want some kind of political considerations, or for that matter, even ideological considerations or hidden agendas affecting their education. Now, I understand, too, being a history teacher, that's going to affect perception, but there's nothing wrong with saying this is my opinion. I did that as a teacher, and I'd present facts to back it up. Yeah. I think other people can do that as well. And you can also not be afraid. If a bad idea is a bad idea, there's no reason to be afraid of it. Yeah. And therefore, a government shouldn't have the power to censor that or to squash that. That's why our founding fathers thought. That's why in the First Amendment it guarantees political and religious speech and practice. Yeah. Which is something tyrants they don't want that either. I would do as much as I could to probably try to get government money out of things. You look at the government agencies that have evolved just in the last 100 years of our history. They're involved in everything now. Yeah. And they're dishing out money to everybody because I believe they would rather have business and enterprise corporations dependent on the government more so than the customer. Yeah. Because in a free society, in a capitalist society, the buyer is power. That's why customer service is such a big deal traditionally. But if they can get by with, if they can shut down their business or run at 50% like a lot of businesses are doing, then they're no longer dependent on the customer to stay in business. They're dependent on a government to give them subsidies to keep going and then we lose power. There's a video I give out to clients about taxation in our country that was developed by an executive producer by an economist named Lawrence Kotlikoff and a guy in the financial business named David McKnight. It's called The Power of Zero. And one of the things in that documentary film, and Doug Orchard, who is the filmmaker, is a documentary filmmaker. That's his specialty. And he took on this project for this movie. It took him over 2 years to develop. And if you guys want to see The Power of Zero, I'll put that link on the site for you to be able to go find out more about this movie. If you want a copy of it, I'll actually give you a copy of it you can take home with you. Yeah, I know. Yeah, it sounds interesting.
But The Power of Zero goes into one of the economists who was being interviewed in this movie was talking about who really has control of the vote in our country today. And when you look at, we as citizens do have an individual vote. And if you look back at the last election, there were about 53 million votes on each side, plus or minus the popular vote. Hillary likes to think that she won the popular vote and should have been president. She's still angry about that.
Yeah. Crying in her Chardonnay somewhere.
Right. So when you look at that as a people group, we really are a nation divided in terms of how we vote. And it's been that way for a number of years. It's been pretty close.
I think it's always been that way.
Yeah, you haven't seen... Like the real vote is a matter of a few million votes cast in terms of how the Electoral College is voted based on a state's
Well, you know, and that goes back even to the Romans. They talked about different patrician and plebeian interests.
Yeah.
You know, we often think now as the plebeians as some kind of slaves and the patricians as the powerful elite.
The elite, yeah.
But plebeian was initially people who didn't own property that lived in cities, urban people who still had a political voice in the early days of the republic, and patricians were the landowners. And you had very wealthy plebeians just as you had very poor patricians. And they even discussed about the different interests, political interests, because the patricians were the ones that were required for military service, and there was a complaint that plebeians might often exploit war for that or benefit from ways that the patricians couldn't. So I not to digress into that, but just saying that we all have, just as we're all, I mean, like everybody's diversified. We all have different interests, different opinions, and where some people are more corrupt than others. Some people have a greater sense of trying to help their fellow man than others do. Some like to exploit their fellow man. And that's what makes government so dangerous, because whenever you have I don't care what it is, whenever you have any kind of institution that can wield that much power over people, it's going to attract those people who like to exploit their fellow man. Yeah. And it may not necessarily even be a bad system, but I write in one of my books, I think in one of those Abe Levine lines where, good laws do absolutely no good if you don't have good men to enforce them. Right. And again, that kind of goes back to something I was saying earlier about teaching my sons to swim, fight, shoot, to think critically, analytically, and to teach them facts, because they're going to have people that are going to want to control them physically by force. Yeah. If my sons ever have anything worth having, somebody's going to try to take it away from them. That is just the evil, corrupt nature of the world. I know not everyone is that way, but there are people that are that way.
You know why thieves rob banks, right?
That's where the money's at.
That's where they get the money. It's like I tell people, you know why there's fences around graveyards?
Everybody's dying to get in.
People dying to get in. There you go. So there's my comedic opportunity there.
Your stand-up's better than mine.
That's sweet. Yeah, it's borrowed jokes for sure. But the point being here with the society we're in today, and how you've kind of written that into The Last Marine, is that we stand in these gulfs of 50 million people on each side that voted in the last election, give or take, 3% on either side, 4%. Yeah. Or margin of error, we'll say. It really speaks to that there's been a society for years that has differed in opinion, and what's different today is that I don't think our young republic in the last, let's call it the last 20 years, has done a good job of being able to have civility. And I think that's what has been lost in the U.S. And so, if I was king for a day, I would probably try to just stop and listen if I had 15 minutes to talk to the world, I would probably try to take 13 minutes to listen and go, okay, I appreciate what you've said. Yeah. I appreciate your stance. Now let's spend 2 minutes trying to be civil in working out our differences, because, it comes back when Moses went up to the mount and got his 10 commandments from God. The people were wanting leadership. The people wanted to be led. They wanted some rules. They wanted society to function well. And it requires leadership. It requires strong leadership. And it requires that leaders sometimes step back and question authority. But when, what was crazy is I kind of feel like we're in that state now as a society that Moses has gone to get the commandments written, and the people are batshit crazy.
They're going crazy. Well, because we need strong leadership, but that's not to be confused with powerful leadership. Yeah. And, in order to have strong leaders, you have to have a strong culture. I think it really comes back to...
Interesting, yeah.
Because, where the strong leader is going to come from.
Yeah.
The children of today are leaders tomorrow. I know it sounds like some kind of fuzzy cliche, but it is true. And we reap what we sow.
Yeah.
And if are we teaching kids to value who they are? If we're teaching kids not to value their country, not to value their culture, that it is corrupt, then who's going to grow up? Why wouldn't they grow up Marxists?
Right.
They're going to. People act basically. What you believe is going to change how you act.
Yeah.
What you take in is going to affect how you think.
Yeah.
How you think is
garbage in, garbage
exactly.
out.
Because what you take in is going to affect how you think. How you think is going to affect how you feel. How you feel is going to affect how you act.
Yeah.
And if we want strong leaders, people that do listen, that do show respect, then you need people who feel the same way. And if you have a culture that doesn't teach people to respect individual, be it their thought, their property, etc., then one side can sit with hold hands and try to bond, and they're just going to get punched in the face.
Right.
And that's kind of what I have happening in my books. You have this one side that's like, hey, what's going on here? Why can't we all get along? And they get clobbered. Book 3 gets into the good guys fighting back a little bit, and punching back, because that's what's going to happen. If good men stand aside while evil men take over and destroy everything, good intentions and warm fuzzy feelings are not going to save civilization.
So in book 3, we're going to see some fictional fixes.
Yeah, kind of. The books are dark. And they're meant to be. It's basically set in the near future, really about the dissolving of American culture.
Yeah.
And us as one nation. And what I mean by that is not even like a political sovereign border or anything, but really as one culture.
Yeah.
I don't see now. I don't see any way this country could unite like it did even say around World War II. How could we really even unite around an issue? And when we do start to unite around an issue, there's always some group here and there trying to break it all apart.
Well, there's a certain amount of mass hysteria for the divide that's between people groups. Like Republicans do not trust Democrats. Democrats do not trust Republicans, and even at the point where there was a moderate relationship of respect between two differences of opinions about how to run government. Now it's like, okay, what's your angle, politician? To each other. The Hill has a way of demonizing each other's
they do.
stances.
Well, and I think some of that's self-deserved. I mean, how many Republicans even trust Republican leaders anymore?
Yeah. Yeah.
We have the term, if you're a Republican, you know what the term rhino is. How many times you elect somebody who's supposed to be a constitutionalist, conservative, all this and that.
Right.
And they get in there and they act just like a hardcore Marxist Democrat or something,
So in your book, in the third book, which is not released yet, and maybe I'm helping drive a narrative here. I don't mean to do that. I know it's not finished, but will that dark overtone see any light? Will there be
that was it. Because I almost didn't write the third book. Almost didn't, because I had the concept in my mind. But I'll be honest with you, I was depressed writing the second book. I had to really tap.
I could feel that a little bit. Yeah.
I had to really tap into some dark stuff and dark feelings to try to get into a mood to write that. Yeah. And I tell you, there were times I didn't know if I had it in me to continue that. But and I can't say what motivated, not without giving out some spoilers, so I'm not going to do that. But I decided to go ahead with the encouragement of a couple people who had read the book before it was published, book 2. I decided to go ahead, and I got started on book 3. So, I want a couple things. I want to give some, because the good guys take it on the chin in book 2. Okay. So I want the good guys kind of dishing it back in book 3 this isn't like one of these warm, happy endings where suddenly everything's just solved in the last few pages and we go back to a happy ending, normal sort of thing. But I want to have hope for a future.
Yeah.
So I'm going to give out. Well, one of the reasons I'm not done writing.
Come on,
yet,
give us a spoiler here on KP's Black Box.
Well, one of the reasons I'm very nearly done with the rough draft, but I decided to add an epilogue onto it because even the ending I came up with was still kind of dark and twisted. At least in my mind, it is.
Like a good jarhead.
Yeah, and I wanted something that was just a little more. It gives just kind of that idea of hope because. Frankly, when things are dark and things are twisted, you got one choice. You either give up and die, or you keep fighting.
Yeah.
And if you
in chaos lies opportunity.
Exactly.
Got to find the opportunity.
And you know what? For every, often people talk about the apocalypse. I know ultimately, I think there will be an apocalypse, right? And the world's destroyed. But think of how many times civilization has collapsed and an entire way of life has ended. Europe went through this. Western Europe went through this when the Roman Empire collapsed. Yeah. One of the things I read about a couple of years ago, I read the book Gone with the Wind. Everybody talked about it. I'd never read it. I read it and realized that in its own way, it's kind of a book about the apocalypse. You have a way of life.
Interesting. I've never heard that correlation.
Well, think about it. In Gone with the Wind, you've got a whole way of life that's coming to an end. And that kind of civilization, that culture collapses and has to be reborn. Take the Russia in 1918, 1920. They go through again a collapse of their civilization and a kind of a rebirth to various degrees, of course. Yeah. Nazi Germany, 1945. Those people had to feel like they were going through. Their world came to an end.
And they got it back to back, World War I and World War II.
Well, Chris, the troops, Germany was never invaded in World War I.
Right.
So, they had some problems, but the war wasn't brought home to them where, your city is now suddenly a pile of rubble. Yeah. And where do you start to rebuild a new civilization, a new culture with?
As Americans, we're so fortunate on that level, modern day, and let's say modern day from 1900 forward. Yeah. We haven't experienced an invasion. Now some would say it happened in the Civil War, it happened during the Revolution, but I'm talking 3 generations removed. So my great grandfather to me now, we've experienced massive wealth, massive prosperity, and with little to no outside interference from other sovereign nations. Now, we're at a crossroads with a nation called China. And, I encourage you, as we're talking off camera, to read Ray Dalio and read how he's bringing his book about. He's basically saying, hey, current world power, U.S., up and rising world power, challenging for that status of world power. Can you imagine paying your property taxes to the CCP 25 or 30 years from now?
No, I wouldn't want to.
Yeah. So there's a potential that what we know to be true today turns out not to be true.
There is.
And what I ask folks a lot of times, even about their own finances, is simply if what you knew to be true today turned out not to be true tomorrow, when would you be an agent for change?
Yeah. No.
And it would be like X marks the spot.
Right now.
Right now.
Yeah.
I want to be an agent for change. And I think that's how our society needs to look at what's going on. And hopefully that's maybe where your book 3 goes is, we got to make some internal changes or someone else will step in and make them for us.
Well, and the reason, I wrote such a dark book wasn't because this is what I really enjoy thinking of the destruction of the United States. Quite the opposite. I'd like to think we haven't gone over the cliff, so to speak. Right. That things can be turned around. But trying to take what I've learned, trying to take experiences I've had, as a young Marine, as traveling around the world, seeing life, death, seeing how other countries lived. And as a Marine, I actually got a chance to go into communist China. for one day, but and I saw how some of these people live there.
Yeah.
Seeing how people live, some of the poverty you see in other parts of the world. And then combining that with what I have learned from studying history, studying human character, try to combine those and to work out kind of a logical consequence of where we're headed. Yeah. Hopefully with the idea of being able to turn away from that. George Orwell attempted to do something similar with this book, 1984. And so I would hope, aside from just trying to write a good story that's entertaining, I really kind of want to write something that might have a cultural impact, that makes a statement in kind of trying to contribute to this evolution of Western culture, a culture that does value freedom and individualism and the rights of men.
Hey, guys, we want to put up 1984 on the site with Travis's book, and even Gone with the Wind, to try to draw this correlation. People who want to get a little more in your head of how you're writing, and that inspiration you got from those type books. To write The Last Marine. Those
were an inspiration. So
what else are you reading now?
Right now, or just or in general?
So if you were telling our listeners today, hey, here's some books that I've read that have really driven the narrative of your
belief
system.
Beyond
the Bible.
A really good book by the historian Victor Davis Hanson called Carnage and Culture.
Victor was he? Did he do stuff with Jack Canfield? Is that the Victor David Hanson I'm thinking of?
I don't know if he's done anything with Canfield or not. He's a historian. He's written for National Review Online, at least
Victor
before.
Hanson.
Victor Davis.
Hanson.
And he's written a lot of books. Brilliant historian. My favorite by him is Carnage and Culture, where he takes different battles throughout world history, major battles.
Carnage and Culture.
And it's where you have a civilization that is of Western culture versus one that is not.
Yeah.
And he talks about basically the superiority of Western culture. And again, culture not being associated with race or ethnicity, but of ideas, of values, and of how these are then practiced. How are these beliefs and values executed in society?
How old's this guy?
I don't know what his age is. I know I'd have to look up his bio.
Where's he from?
He's from California.
Okay.
I know he's been involved with the Hoover Institution.
Okay.
And I believe he used to teach, I don't know if he still does, but I think he used to teach at the University of California, one of their campuses.
So he couldn't be accused of being too much of a right-wing kind of guy, huh?
Yeah, well, I think I know a lot.
If you come from the land of fruits and nuts, a.k.a. California.
So, I guess you'd have to ask him what his political leanings are. But his stuff is good as far as looking at culture. I think he's got he's good at that. Another book I liked by him was one of his early ones called The Western Way of War. I think I've got that right, or maybe
Way of War. Okay, and what's that book about?
That dealt with how Greeks came up with the concept of hard warfare or total war. The idea that that free men need to fight. Going back to the Greeks, where free men, when they got away from the warlords, and the Greeks figured out that if they arm themselves and take up the responsibility of their own defense, their own protection, they don't need warlords that they had to pay taxes to protect them. Thus, they come up with the concept of the phalanx, of a very direct, very brutal, hard warfare where you try to destroy your enemy as fast as possible in the most brutal way possible, because that ends the war faster. Sounds
like a bunch of jarheads. Well, they approach.
No, absolutely, because the idea is you want that war to end as soon as possible. That you'd rather have short-term pain for long-term gain, so to speak, because free men need to go back to work. Right, to support themselves. Therefore, destroy your enemy as fast as you can, and then go back to work. Put down the sword, pick up the plow, sort of thing, as opposed to a government bureaucracy or a professional military that actually needs to have consistent warfare to justify itself. Therefore, you get this concept, the Western way of war. Our total war concept is to destroy our enemy as quickly as possible, and then go back to normal, a real normal, not a new normal.
Can I share with you one of my concepts for fixing society? it starts at home, obviously, number one. But beyond that, when you leave the comfort of home, you become a politician. You go to Capitol Hill as a duty, not as an occupation. And in doing so, you go there on a volunteer basis that you were voted there by your constituents, by your community. And you're there on a term, aka term limits. But you get a stipend to cover your expenses only when you come to Capitol Hill to handle the people's business. And then when you're done handling the people's business, you go back to your farm, you go back to your computer station, you go back to your standard, your way of living, and your employer pays you just like they pay a reservist. So my young man Noah over here is a reservist. When he goes off to reserve duty, he's guaranteed a job with me when he comes back, written into law.
Yeah.
So I think politicians, see, unfortunately, I have some great friends who are attorneys, and they're fabulous. Some of the brightest people in the world are attorneys. I hate to say that about that people group, but they are.
Yeah.
But I think they've ruined the side of government that makes laws, in the sense that it's turned into a professional career. Where I've got some family members who have thought about their attorneys and have thought, well, maybe one day I'll go be a professional politician. I'm like, oof, please don't.
Yeah.
As a way to earn a living, because you're not going to help our society.
No, it's funny, but I like your idea. I've joked. I used to tell students I had kind of a similar concept that if we paid congressmen, give them the same pay that a Lance Corporal makes in the Marine Corps, and then put them in government housing, I bet we'd see a lot of things change in this country.
Yeah, and you get to come home when you make change.
Yeah, maybe only have them in session 3 or 4 months every 2 years or something.
But really, politicians stand on the Hill from Nancy Pelosi to one guy, actually, I give him a shout out. I do like Dan Crenshaw down in Texas. I really do think the guy is trying to make some change, but it doesn't take long to be in that system before you're neck deep in the swamp.
Yeah, it
stealing
does
from
seem to be
Trump
that
there.
way. Yeah.
But I think if you had this world or had this society that said, look, it's an honor and a privilege to serve, and it really is a servant mindset where you're going there to serve your community. And we go as a community, we go, okay, we're going to send you to represent us. But we're only going to pay you a stipend to cover your costs. You're not getting a pension. You're not getting $240,000 a year.
Yeah.
And I don't care if you're rich or poor or in between. If you're a citizen, and we have these guidelines that we all agree upon of who can go serve in office, and we all
make them pay income tax on their political donations.
On their political, right?
Make them pay taxes on that.
And that's where I go back in this movie, and I kind of got off that subject with you. But in the movie The Power Zero, you hear one of these economists talk about that the massive donations that are given by corporations to drive a narrative, that's really where change occurs. It happens at the corporate level by buying the vote. Yeah. And it's I hate to say it, but it happens on both sides of the fence, that the corporate narrative drives the vote in our country. And that's what's different about where it was 200 years ago, is that a politician would leave his farm, would leave his family, and would go to Philadelphia and meet at the Continental Congress. Yeah. And they would work on the people's business to say, hey, these are changes that we need to make for all men. And we've seen iteration of that. We've seen change of that, where all men equaled women, equaled blacks, equaled those who were oppressed. And I'm an eternal optimist who has some skepticism about our current way of life, our current environment.
That's good. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Yeah.
So, I appreciate what you've done in writing this book, The Last Marine, because I think it really brings us back to a point of you went to some deep, dark places to write this fictional book that, oddly enough, the timing and the sequence of you releasing these books have hit around a time where we're seeing some real social unrest at all levels. And I think the timeliness of this book coming out, if you want to read it, you can look at it on our website, blackboxgroup.com, or you can go to amazon.com, look up Last Marine, or you can search T.S. Ransdell on Amazon, and Travis's books will show up. We got to go today and jump off this podcast. I could stay here and hang out with you all day long.
Yeah. No,
when book 3 comes out, call me, let me know. I would like a early copy.
Oh, yeah, sure.
So that's your fee for being here today, man.
Sure, you got it.
Please send me a copy of it. Love to read it. God bless you. I hope he gives you massive success from this for you and your family, and that our little podcast here blows up for you, and a lot of people want to have a conversation with you or want to buy your books from you. So any parting thoughts you want to share with us?
I just want to thank you for the opportunity. It's been a blast to be on your podcast. I really appreciate it. So,
well, there you go. This is how social media is supposed to work, right? Two people meet, and we have a common complaint with the Marine Corps that hopefully they work on one day.
Yeah.
But from that, a friendship of a massive fraternity, they helped. Some guys long ago helped us get where we are today.
Well, yeah, absolutely.
In Ton Tavern.
It's still. Well, Marines have always been cantankerous. I mean, we've never. Real Marines don't like the big brass, the authoritarians. We're always kind of a rebellious bunch.
Yeah.
What was it Chesty Puller said? It was something about you want to go to the brig to see the real Marines or something like that.
Yeah, if you didn't have a page 11, you weren't a real Marine, right?
Yeah. So it's good to be a little rebellious,
Yeah.
So.
Well, hey, thanks for talking through some controversial stuff with me today. And
you're welcome. No, I appreciate you inviting me on the show.
Yeah, it was a blast, and I'm ready to go eat. As you can tell, I like to. I don't say no to many plates. And you're on this fasting, like intermittent fasting, right?
I do. Yeah.
Is it time to eat for you yet?
Yeah. It's getting there. It's it's something my wife and I started a few months ago, and actually I found it to be a lot easier to follow than what it sounds like initially. Getting off like the sugars and the simple carbs, and then trying to eat like over. Right now, I'm eating typically between like about a 3 to 4 hour window. Wow. I mean, I'll splurge a little on the like Saturday and Sunday night. I might have like an extra like sugar-free dessert or something after the kids go to bed. And my wife and I have our watch TV a little alone and have like a.
Go back and watch the podcast with Cheryl Zonkowski, and
Oh yeah.
She's got a whole thought process on but it's good stuff, and it helped me lose some weight and kind of get control of my eating habits again.
That's good. Well,
portion control was the big thing I learned from it.
Because I know for me that's always been that was an issue. Not that I've ever been like really all that obese, but as I get older,
you're not even all that obese. You're pretty fit. 54 years old, man. You're in good shape. So.
Well, thank you.
Is it 54?
53. 53.
Sorry, added a year.
But it gets harder. As you get older you get, it's harder to stay in shape. Yeah. And I know for a long time, I found myself where I didn't weigh any more than I did when I was in the Marine Corps. I just didn't carry it the same,
Right. Oh, I can empathize with that for sure.
Yeah, it's good to kind of lean up, and I got young boys, so I got to stay in shape.
Yeah,
with
there
them,
you go, man. Stay healthy for them.
Yeah.
So God bless you. Safe travels back to Phoenix, and we hope to have you back on the show in the near future, man.
Thank you, Kenny.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Bye.